name is Daciana Iancu. I am an anthroposophic medicine physician, and I am one of the founders of Foundation for Health Creation. And I am here today with Luisa and Rachel, who are the founders of Magenta, a school for inner development.
Yes, thank you for having us.
So
I'm Rachel
nice.
Hazlett-Carr.
And I'm Louisa Barnum.
It's nice to have you here today.
Thank you.
And one thing I wanted to talk with you about is how much, stress being at the core of most illnesses and what you bring to help support health and health creation with your program based on that, really this concept that stress is at the core of most illnesses. Well, in my practice, I really find that stress is at the base, at the core of pretty much every illness, I think. Yeah, every illness.
Everyone.
Everyone, yeah. I mean, the classic ulcer, most people can associate stress with it, like a stomach ulcer. But really, stress is, part of migraines or chronic fatigue, low back pain, definitely digestive issues. Most of the common illnesses that people go to the doctor for today, stress really is underneath that.
Wow.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing.
It is, actually.
Yeah. So, as a doctor, I can only help them so far. I can address the issue at hand. I can give them remedies. We can talk about lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, all that. And all that is helpful, and it gets them so far. People get better. But unless they really treat the underlying issue, either the same illness comes back or they develop a different illness. And the underlying issue really has to do with stress.
So then that begs the question, what is stress and how do we get to the root of stress?
Yeah. So what is stress? It's a very broad term, right?
Yeah.
And most people, they go to the doctor and they say, yeah, I know it's stress. But what does that mean? The way I see stress is really has to do with tension. Because we have stressful situations all the time, and some people go through it just beautifully, and some people can go through the similar stressful situation and not deal with it very well. So it's how do we hold tension about certain things in our life? And this is why I love your program so much, because I really think that you address that tension that is held. That we all hold it in different ways, in different patterns. Most people have this tension. You really address that through what you do. So I am grateful for you, because when patients come to me and I can help them so far, I need a community. I need to be able to send them to you to be able to have extra support, have that community support where they can go further and understand the patterns that are underneath that are causing the illness.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell me a little what you do.
So we're really interested in the mind mess that we get into, because so much of what we struggle with in terms of stress is how we internalize our life experiences.
Okay.
And we can internalize them in a short-term way, like there's no money in the bank and we're stressed, but then the money comes in and we're okay. But especially when we're children, and how we're raised and the cultural and social environment in which we grow up, we learn through mimicking so much of our strategies, or not very, either good strategies or really terrible strategies for how to manage and how we integrate all of this, how we internalize it. And so a lot of that has to be brought into the light of consciousness, because when you see it, it's only then that you have a choice about how you meet the stress in your life.
That's right.
There's always going to be something to stress you out. Life, I don't know what you guys think, but life is incredibly stressful. I mean, just bureaucracy alone is tough, right? Taxes every year, or And then you've got the societal collapse that we are all watching in slow motion right now.
Yeah, and I want to go back a little bit to what you said, is that we develop these patterns in our life. So most people are familiar with adverse childhood events, but I think it goes way beyond that, right? It doesn't. One doesn't have to have major trauma in their childhood.
No.
It can just be a stressed parent, or maybe a parent that's not available so much because they have to work all the time, or whatever. It can be something that seems simple from the outside, but it's really quite more traumatic.
Yeah.
And then a person growing up in that environment develops a certain tension in their body.
Yes.
Like maybe they're always vigilant, or maybe they hold their body posture in a certain way, or maybe, and then with that comes mental patterns that they hold. So that's the tension that really sits underneath a lot of the illness.
Right. Isn't that interesting? So we have to get to know those. And one of the ways that we've developed some language in Magenta around these phenomena. So this process of forming mental pictures. You know how a picture says like 1,000 words. You look at the picture and you get it. You get the whole concept. Well, when we form a mental picture around how we've internalized these childhood experiences. Like one example would be a really major thing that many people aren't even aware of is attunement. How attuned were the parents to the needs of the child? The child was loved, but their needs weren't really seen because the parent didn't get that attunement when they were a child. And so these things are passed down through the generations, this epigenetics of trauma, but not just trauma, but a lack of attunement. 7 generations past, there could have been an incredibly traumatic experience that has been passed down, and how it shows up in the habitual ways that we look at ourselves and that we look at the world. So we call that like a world view.
In my office, that shows up as I have migraines, and my mom had migraines, and my grandmother had migraines, right? And they're all around a certain pattern, maybe around menstrual cycle, because maybe great-great-great-grandmother could not take time to rest during her menses, and she developed this tension pattern that then was passed down to all the women in the family.
This is very real. This is very real. So it's so cool that you're observing this. And from our point of view, when we're just like we're not doctors, so we're not having dialogue with people around their physical symptoms, but we're seeing a different perspective of how these things are passed down through the generations. But they're so subtle. And adverse childhood experiences are a really good example of how we don't truly understand how we are impacted.
And when we grow up in a culture or a family culture where that's how everyone around us is expressing themselves, then it's just completely normal. We can't see the forest for the trees because this is what is just surrounding us until we grow up and we start to have a little dawning light, telling us that maybe this isn't normal, or we have something, some information that comes to us that helps us start to see that there is another way possible, that there is another way that we can hold ourselves and see ourselves in the world.
So, okay, so let's take migraines, for example, since I mentioned it. So if somebody comes with migraines and I can only take them so far, and I know this pattern is really deeply embedded in their body, their generation, their ancestry. How, and it's usually a certain type of tension and mental pictures around it. Sometimes it can even come with, nobody ever helps me. I'm always the one that does everything. I know I'm guilty of that.
Do you get migraines?
I used to have migraines.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but this used to be one of my tapes, I'm all alone. It occasionally still comes out, but at least now I recognize it.
Right.
So I guess I'm curious, how do you guys approach that? How can you help somebody who comes in with a certain embedded pattern like that?
Well, we start with the entry point that we start with is your everyday life that you're working with right now. So we don't just jump in and try to, tell people to go deep into their past. We work with what is sort of where they're having a reaction. So maybe where they start to notice the tension coming up, or where they have a trigger coming up. That's the word that we use, where a trigger is just having some kind of compulsive reaction that you're not really in control of, whether that's outward or just inward in terms of fear or worry or angst or doubt. Any of those things can be a trigger. And then we have a lot of tools to help them really slow down and start to witness and piece apart what is actually happening in that moment. And that slowing down and witnessing is where there's a lot of juice, and we have a lot of power.
Yeah, because you have to get to know how the pattern is playing out in your current reality. You have to get to know the habit. We have to get to know the whole being nature of this this force in us, that this habit. And when we get to know its whole, the origin story of how it came into being is important, but it's not always the place to start. It's a part of the discovery, but so often we think that the wound is only in the past, and we go back into the past, and we go back into the past trying to find answers. And it's not that they're not there, but really the answers are in how you have internalized your experiences. And that is in the present, because it's how you continue to behave, what you're thinking. In other words, what you're concluding, what you believe about yourself and the world that you may not even be aware of. We're so often operating out of all these assumptions, and we don't even know it. And that drives so much of this tension. For instance, my particular issue has been unworthiness. A lot of tension and a lot of physical, I'm just thinking of them right now as you were talking. I'm like, oh my God, I've got all these physical symptoms that are related to this sort of general term of unworthiness that I've had to struggle with. And this has been my belief, but I had to really get to know it, find its true name, and go, I see how it's playing out in all these little areas of my life, because we have a mantra in Magenta: how you do one thing is how you do everything.
So I just want to back up a little bit. So a couple of things. First, I think it's important to mention is that when one is ill, whether it's migraines or fatigue or anything, we're not saying that it's their fault. We're not saying that is one's fault and they didn't do something right and that's why they have this illness. I think that's really important to understand. And at the same time, we're also saying that one can have power in choice in their healing path, that they're not completely a victim to the illness, but there is some freedom there, more than maybe we realize. Freedom of choice.
And that's what we want.
So I want to back up a little bit. So what you guys are saying is that if we slow down enough, we can catch those moments when we either go back into the same old pattern of I'm a victim, somebody else is doing this to me, poor me, whatever the story is. Or if we're slow enough and we have the capacity to witness ourselves, we can realize, I have a choice. I can go down a different path where I'm in charge. I can choose a different, whether it's a different story, where it's a different way of seeing life. I may not even know what the other story or the other path looks like, but I know that there's at least one other path.
Yeah, because the first step is really understanding how you're currently operating. And so once you bring your understanding or your cognition to this whole package of your beliefs and the feelings that are arising in you and your assumptions, all of these things that happen instantaneously when we're triggered, whether that's us being afraid of, around something that's happening at work, or angry at our husband for doing the same thing again, anytime we have that compulsive reaction, that's where we can work. That's the opportunity. And so first we have to bring some understanding, and then once you get that whole picture, you name the wound, as Louisa said, there's this, release from the binds that it has on you. And it's like the other path just most of the time opens itself automatically. There's not
It's
like
beautiful.
a hemming and hawing of like, what do I need to do instead? It just happens when we release ourselves from the grip of whatever this being nature that we've been carrying maybe for generations that is, unconscious to us.
Yeah. And so then all of a sudden, all this, well, and I want you to speak to this too, but all this energy that was bound up in this stress pattern expressing itself, not only physically, but also emotionally and mentally and spiritually and psychically, when that is no longer, when you've taken your power back from that, when you've given it its true name, it doesn't have the same power over you anymore. And then there's this release of this. You've got energy. So can you speak to this from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think these patterns hold a lot of our life forces, a lot of our energy in them. I mean, it takes a lot of life force and energy to maintain the tension. And so that can be an emotional tension. It can be effort. It can be hypervigilance. These hold a lot of life energy. Or it can be something like neck pain or low back pain. It can express itself on a physical level. So it can be anywhere between emotional to physical. And when these patterns are released, people have a lot more energy for life, for whatever it is, for creation, for inspiration. So I think that's why this is really important.
Yeah. But there's one more thing to say on that. I hope I'm not overcomplicating things, but sometimes you have to empty out of the old in order for the new to come in. And that can be scary because we are very identified. Like at least we know who we are. We're comfortable even in our pain. And so the process of letting that go can feel scary because then we no longer know who we are when we're not a victim, when we're not suffering, when we're not struggling with worth, or So this is a tricky thing, but to understand that if you are able to, if you allow yourself to face it and free yourself from it, you are going to not only discover increased energy and creative possibility, but you're going to find out who you really are when you're not beholden to this maybe even multi-generational thing you've inherited.
I think happiness starts to creep in.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we're talking about these fantastic things, but I think it's a bit harder to get there than it seems. So how, well, first of all, I think one needs support. One needs...
Takes a village.
A community, emotional support, just holding from others.
Yeah.
We can't do this work alone.
Yeah.
How do you facilitate this? How do you help people on this path?
Well, that is the reason why, essentially, why we started a membership program, so that for a nominal amount of money every month, people can come in and get into practice. Because this is really at the heart of, I think, personal transformation or inner development, however you want to call it. The concepts are important. They're like tools with which you dig into the garden. But they're not going to grow the plants. The tools aren't going to do that. They just help you prepare the soil. And what grows and the forces of transformation is regular and rhythmical practice, working with the tools, doing the journaling exercises, getting into a meditation practice that is designed to support your inner development work. Dialogue, yeah. You want to?
Yeah, being seen and, seeing others and being seen is so healing, to first own, what you're witnessing to yourself and then to confess it to another person, I'll have this experience like with my husband where it'll dawn on me that my anger and everything I'm holding, toward him has actually nothing to do with him, and it's, my own. And, I can admit that to myself. And then when I admit that to him, like, okay, babe, that actually was not about you. And this is actually what's going on for me. It's not even about apologizing. I mean, that's a helpful thing to do, but it's about owning and naming what's happening for me. And then to be seen in that is so healing and liberating. And so to be able to do that in community, he doesn't need to be an expert or a therapist to be able to just see me in my process and my courage for vulnerability and, my willingness to do my work. He can just, witness me with compassion and care. And that is so healing. And so we can really do that for each other in community.
Yeah, and how many people have a community of peers who may be diverse in ideologies, in opinions, but there's a field out there beyond right and wrong where we can just see each other.
We can meet.
And we can meet. And I think that's the community that we want to build, where there is a true meeting, but that isn't something that you can just do. You have to practice, and you practice regularly so that you can learn how to meet people in this way. And let me just call it what it is. It's a spiritual capacity that we have to practice and build, because what we're talking about is a spiritual need, to be seen, to be heard, to walk in another's shoes, to grow a capacity for compassion and love and interest in the other, and holding space for each other's healing and transformation.
Yeah, that's all fascinating. So there's definitely, sounds like there's a spiritual component, a big spiritual component to what you do. And I know a lot of your work comes out of anthroposophy and then also some Native American as well. You've studied a lot of teachers. Do you want to comment a little bit about what your influences are?
They're all anthroposophical teachers. Let me just say that. I mean, of course, I've done a lot of... I'm really interested in trauma and adverse childhood experiences, and of course a lot of psychology. So I've studied a lot of my favorite, researchers there, Bessel van der Kolk and Janina Fisher and Gabor Mate and others like that. But most of my influences are really anthroposophy. I've been studying anthroposophy since I was 20. I've been reading Steiner since then, like my whole adult life.
You mean 5 years? Okay. I'm just kidding.
I'm like 51, to be precise. So those are mine. What about yours?
So those are I had about 10 years in a Soto Zen Buddhism school, and was really studied and followed that lineage. And then came across Steiner's work and then the work of some of his, contemporaries and students. And Steiner's work sort of just built on to what I had already really developed as a practice and a worldview. It wasn't necessarily conflicting, but it added pieces that I was interested in and that maybe were missing for me a little bit in the school of Zen. So now that is really, also my main influence. Steiner, Kuhlevin, Valentin Tomberg.
Thorsen.
So, and that's where a lot of our tools and, methodologies that we bring for Magenta come out of these streams, these, Western esoteric streams of spiritual study that we've brought to modern challenges, modern language, and, tried to make them more accessible.
Yeah, but also only what we ourselves really understand. And in our podcast, we talk a lot about our experiences, and we try to draw from our experiences because that's what really counts. Having an academic interest in these things is fine, but if you don't if you don't cook and eat it yourself, then you can't really justify teaching it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to summarize a little bit what we've been saying all along. So one thing I mentioned is how much illness really comes and stems from underlying emotional issues.
Yeah.
Some of them that come from this lifetime, but many that actually are rooted even deeper, like in our ancestry. And how these patterns of tension are really underneath illness and pretty much unhappiness, relationship issues. And the program that you offer can help one gain a bit of an understanding of these patterns that one may hold, maybe mental pictures. And I believe there's more than just mental pictures.
Yes.
There's like an emotional component to it as well. And through persistent practice, which really becomes spiritual practice, one can develop the ability to first recognize these mental pictures, identify them, even name them, like really get to know them. Whether or not one dwells of where they come from is not as important as really just recognizing these patterns.
That's the first main step. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a lot of healing and liberation that can come with just that. There's a lot of freeing ourselves from these, mental pictures that we're holding unconsciously can happen with working with the present day.
Yeah. And working in the past can come after that, but especially if you're dealing with trauma, there's a certain preparation that needs to take place before you go back into the historical traumatic experiences, especially if it's complex trauma, because you've got to be sufficiently prepared. Otherwise, you're going to re-traumatize yourself. So that's why we really begin in the present for everything.
Because it helps start to build the muscles to be able to witness.
And how do you, so there's a lot of emotional energy that gets trapped in these patterns. How does one discharge the emotional energy from it?
Well, so I think there's a lot of anatomy that I think we need to talk about. And we can even talk about anatomy when it comes to the life of emotions and feelings. And it's important to understand the phenomenology of what's happening to you, what's happening inwardly in your thinking life. That's the mental picture forming process. Also in your feeling life, that you can, just in a very general way, you can categorize your feelings into two camps. One you can call non-cognitive feelings. They are self-facing. Or self-feeling is how we call it. Those kinds of feelings are usually negative, like anger, shame, guilt, sadness, apathy. And then you have a whole other camp, which is called cognitive feelings. And they are healing and regenerative. They are faced outward, like joy, reverence, peace, equanimity, gratitude. These kinds of feelings are enormously healing, and we just don't use them enough as a tool because part of the problem is when we have these mental pictures, there are always feelings associated with the mental pictures. And the reason why we can't change our minds about what we believe, we keep coming back to the same old thing, is because of our feelings. What can happen is when we get trapped in non-cognitive feelings like shame, which is particularly difficult, it's an addictive style feeling. Non-cognitive feelings are very addictive. And when you connect that to a mental picture that you don't know how to not believe, you have a really, really difficult setup. I mean, it's no wonder that people deal with chronic anxiety or chronic depression or chronic stress, because we have a situation within that is meshed together into a bundle that we can't understand and we can't see into. And so that's why in Magenta, we do this careful work of separating out the components. So the mental picture forming process from the feelings, so that we can look at it all, again, with the light of our consciousness, because this is the key to healing, is we start to understand what's really going on. And when we realize, okay, so I'm starting to get more conversant, more fluent in the language of feelings, like what I'm actually feeling, not just in a very general way, but we really start to get to know this terrain of feelings. And we start to get to know the difference between a self-feeling, which is addictive and enclosed and non-cognitive, doesn't tell us anything about ourselves or the world. It's just, we're just wallowing in it.
Give me an example.
Self-pity.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really powerful trap right there. It doesn't, there's no way out, and there's no healing there. There's just more of the same. And so part of what we do is work with this reality of the phenomena of our feeling life. Like, this is how it is. This is a part of, we've got to get to know the nature of the soul and how it works.
Yeah.
Then we can start to work with how to cultivate and how to grow feelings that have power to help us regenerate. Now, of course, you can't choose to feel whatever you want to feel whenever you want to, and that's a part of the challenge.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah.
Yes. So that's why there has to be this is why we use meditation. It's a very powerful tool of intervention in the thinking life and the feeling life. And that's what we mean by building muscles. You got to build muscles in your mind, and you got to build muscles in your heart when you're doing this work.
Yeah, well, I think it's, in order to do work like this, the one has to be pretty resourced. And so one thing I always tell my patients is to stop and rest.
Yeah.
Right? And meditation is a big component of that. Like, if we stop and meditate, then we're able to digest more throughout of our experiences.
Good point.
And then we can begin to do this work. So it's really, I think it's impossible to do this work while speeding up. And ironically, I think that when we deal with uncomfortable feelings, what we tend to do is speed up. Like, we get busy.
We run away.
We take on more jobs or more responsibilities, because then we don't have to feel our present feelings.
Yeah.
So making space for this work is important. And meditation can be a fantastic way of making space for this kind of work. So this is really fantastic. I feel like I feel like what I do and what you guys do would complement each other very well, because in my practice, I can support people with lifestyle and diet, exercise, and especially diagnostics, and especially with a lot of remedies and supplements. The anthroposophic remedies are really so beautiful in the way they can come in and help with the stress, help with the symptoms. And sometimes I need more help. I need help from community, from people, from you, to also support my patients and the clients and the community. It's not just the supplements. It's not just the remedies. It's there's so much more there that's needed, and that's where you come in as being part of that. So I'm really excited about you being out here and doing this work.
Thank you so much. I actually, it's occurring to me the same thing, because we are not focused on, obviously, on the physical side of, in the nature of healing. I mean, we did mention it in one of our episodes. It's like this, it's multi-layered, that the healing process, it's not just about this or that, right? And being able to have you as a resource where we can be like, you really should, look at what Dr. Daci is doing and use this. Like, it is a village. It is a whole, it's all of us together, working together, like a great big circle.
And it's not just me. There is a whole community of anthroposophic doctors out there who do what I do. And then there's other people too, like naturopaths, integrative medicine doctors, which complement well. And there's also allopathic medicine, which sometimes is necessary. And I think the more we bring in all the resources, and you mentioned this in your podcast all the time about there are a lot of resources in the community. You know, I think the more we can empower people to seek them out and use everything that's available, and also use the tools that are the most resonate with each individual.
Yeah.
And we're pieces of it, right? Everybody's different.
Yeah.
But yes, there are more anthroposophic doctors. One can look at anthroposophicmedicine.org is a website of anthroposophic doctors in North America. So, and then your website, magenta.fm, and you guys are on YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah, we're on YouTube, magenta.fm. We're also on Instagram and TikTok for just the little bite-sized bits of information. And you can also find our YouTube show and the podcast on our website, as you said, magenta.fm. And also our email list is there, and we are sending out a lot of free resources and just little trainings or little teachings or practices to give people a taste and to, you know, support people who are on our email list. So you can subscribe on our website, and we really encourage people to do so.
Yeah. And we also have a membership where we open up enrollment for a short time, like 5 days, and then we close it again, and just really work with and flow with the people who come in. But that opens periodically, so it's really important. If you're interested in that, obviously you can go to magenta.fm/membership. But if you're on our email list, then you'll hear when the next enrollment period opens. So make sure you sign up.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Daci.
Yeah, it's really nice working with you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You too.